Welcome to our channel. Today's story isn't about success. It's about the moments before success, when belief is fragile and quitting feels reasonable. Most people don't fail because they are weak. They fail quietly, in the space where effort goes unnoticed and progress feels invisible. That space is heavy. It's where doubt speaks louder than hope, where dreams feel impractical, and where giving up sounds logical. If you've ever stood there, doing the work with no applause, carrying a dream no one else can see, this story is for you. What you're about to hear is not a highlight reel. It's a slow walk through uncertainty, discipline, and loneliness. It's about choosing to continue when there is no proof it will work. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now, when the only thing you have is persistence. So stay with this story, not to escape your life, but to understand it better. Because before success shows its face, it always tests your patience first. Some dreams don't arrive with confidence. They arrive quietly, almost inconveniently, in places where no one is prepared to believe in them. I grew up in a town where people didn't talk about the future. They talked about getting through the week. The streets were crowded, the houses were close together, and expectations were small enough to survive on. No one said you couldn't dream. They just lived in a way that made dreaming unnecessary. My family was ordinary in the most invisible way. We had food, but never extra. We had shelter, but no space. My father spent his days fixing machines that broke again the next morning. His hands were always rough, his shoulders always tired. He didn't complain. He just kept going, as if endurance was his job. My mother carried everything else. She managed time, money, emotions, and silence. If strength had a routine, she lived it daily. Our house had one room that tried to be everything at once. Bedroom, living room, storage. The fan worked only when it wanted to. The tap leaked like it had something to say. And inside that tight space, there was a feeling I didn't know how to explain yet. A sense that my thoughts were larger than the walls around me. Every evening, I stood near the window. Not because there was something beautiful to see, but because there was something different. Cars passed by slowly, filled with people who laughed easily. Music played. Windows were open. They looked relaxed, as if life wasn't chasing them. I didn't envy them. I questioned the distance between their world and mine. How does someone end up there? What path did they take? And was that path closed to people like us? While other kids filled the streets with noise, I walked in another direction. 3 kilometers, one way, to a small cyber cafe. I didn't go there to play. I went to watch. Screens glowing in dark rooms, fingers moving fast, words and symbols forming something useful, something real. That was where I heard the phrase, software engineer, for the first time. It didn't sound like a job. It sounded like control. These were people who didn't need machines or strength. They built things using ideas. They created value without asking permission from their background. In that moment, something settled inside me. Not excitement, not confidence, just clarity. I didn't own a computer. There was no internet at home. My English was broken and hesitant. I had no examples to follow, no shortcuts to take. But still, a decision formed. Quietly, firmly. I didn't know how I would get there. I only knew I didn't want to stay where I was. And that's how the hardest part began. Not the struggle, but the waiting. The time when belief exists without evidence, when a dream is real only to the person carrying it. That kind of dream doesn't ask for attention, it asks for patience. Because when a dream doesn't fit the room you're in, the room will try to convince you that the dream is the problem. Dreams are light when you imagine them alone. They become heavy when other people have to carry the consequences. For a long time, my dream lived quietly inside me. It didn't disturb anyone. It didn't demand money or explanations. It was just a direction I looked toward when life felt small. But reality has a way of interrupting quiet hopes, especially when responsibility enters the room. One night, I heard my parents talking after they thought I was asleep. Their voices were low, careful, as if each word cost something. They weren't arguing. They were calculating. Bills, rent, food, time. And then my name entered the conversation, not with anger, but with worry. "He's a good boy," my father said. "But we don't have money for college." That sentence didn't sound cruel. That's what made it hurt more. In that moment, my dream stopped feeling personal. It felt selfish. How do you chase a future that requires sacrifice when the people you love are already tired from surviving the present? How do you ask for support when there is nothing left to give? I didn't confront them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say, "I'll find a way." Instead, I listened, and something shifted inside me. Not hope, but priority. At 17, I understood something many people learn much later. Sometimes life doesn't crush your dream. It simply asks you to postpone it. So I made a decision that looked practical from the outside and heavy on the inside. I folded my dream neatly into a corner of my mind and put on a uniform instead. A night security guard. No future promises, no growth plan. Just a paycheck and a responsibility fulfilled. The first night on the job, I didn't feel brave. I felt older, not in age, but in weight. My time was no longer mine. My energy had an expiration date. I stood for hours, watching doors that weren't meant for me to enter, guarding buildings that represented a world I wasn't part of. I told myself this was temporary, that I was being mature, that this was the right thing to do. And maybe it was. But maturity has a quiet cost. It teaches you how to silence parts of yourself that don't fit your circumstances. During the day, I slept. At night, I worked. And somewhere in between, my dream waited without making noise. It didn't disappear. It didn't argue. It just stayed still, like it was watching to see what I would do next. People around me called it reality. They said, "This is how life works." They said, "You're helping your family. That's enough." And for a while, I believed them. But there is a difference between choosing responsibility and abandoning yourself. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a deeper conflict, not between success and failure, but between survival and identity. Because when a dream becomes a burden, the real question isn't whether it's possible. The real question is how long you can ignore it before it starts asking for an answer. Some borders are invisible, but you feel them every day. My job placed me in front of a building made almost entirely of glass. During the day, it reflected the sky. At night, it revealed everything inside: light, movement, purpose. From where I stood, the world I wanted was only a few meters away, yet it might as well have been another country. Every night at 9, I took my position. The uniform was stiff, the stick in my hand felt heavier than it looked, and the wind always found a way through my jacket. Inside the building, people sat in warm rooms, typing, talking, solving problems that mattered. Outside, my task was simple: stand still and watch. At first, I told myself this was temporary, a pause, not an ending. But repetition has a way of shaping identity. When you stand in the same place long enough, the world begins to define you by where you stand. The engineers walked past me with laptops on their backs and confidence in their steps. Some nodded. Most didn't. To them, I wasn't part of the building. I was part of the furniture. Necessary, but unnoticed. I wasn't offended. I understood. They were busy living the life I only imagined. What hurt wasn't being ignored. It was recognizing how easily the world accepts roles. Inside the glass, conversations about deadlines and features filled the air. Outside, I listened to the quiet rhythm of the night. Cars passing, footsteps echoing, the hum of electricity above me. I began to study more than people. I studied movement, language, belonging. I watched how certainty changes the way someone walks. Every night, I spoke to myself without moving my lips. This is not where your story ends. Not because I believed it fully, but because the alternative was to accept that this was all there would ever be. There is a strange pain in guarding something you want to become part of. I was protecting the future I wasn't allowed to enter, holding the line between two lives, one lived, one imagined. But the glass did something else. It taught me. It showed me that distance is often smaller than it feels, that the difference between inside and outside isn't always talent or intelligence. Sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's access, and sometimes it's the courage to keep wanting something even when you're standing in the cold. I started to pay attention not to what I lacked, but to what I could observe, how problems were discussed, how teams interacted, how calm replaced chaos when people knew what they were doing. I didn't have their skills, but I was learning their world. At night, while the city slept, I stayed awake, not just guarding doors, but guarding a belief, a fragile one. The belief that watching closely today could prepare me for entering tomorrow, because being outside the glass isn't just about exclusion. It's about deciding whether you'll turn away or keep looking in long enough to learn how to get through. Progress doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in corners where no one is watching. I didn't have a classroom. I didn't have a teacher. What I had were short breaks, a weak signal, and a phone that struggled to stay alive. During my night shifts, I sat on the edge of the parking lot and searched for answers one video at a time. What is coding? How do websites work? Beginner tutorial. The words felt foreign, but I kept listening. Most of the time, I didn't understand much. The videos loaded slowly. The explanations moved fast. English slipped through my ears before I could catch it, but I stayed. Because even confusion felt closer to my dream than standing still. I couldn't afford internet at home, so I planned carefully. Late at night, when data was cheaper, I downloaded free PDFs and saved them on my phone. In the morning, after my shift ended, I read them under dim light while the rest of the house slept. Sometimes by candlelight when the power failed. My eyes burned. My head felt heavy. Sleep became a short visit instead of rest. People around me noticed the tiredness, not the effort. They said I looked sick. They said I was wasting time. Friends laughed when I talked about learning to code. Relatives shook their heads. Be realistic, they said. You already have a job. To them, ambition without credentials looked like arrogance. To me, it felt like survival. One evening, my father spoke words he thought were practical, not cruel. He said some people are meant to dream, and others are meant to endure. We didn't have time for imagination, he said. We needed stability. I didn't argue. I respected his fear. It came from responsibility, not disbelief. But that night, something settled inside me. I realized that no one was going to rescue me from this path. There would be no mentor arriving at the right moment, no scholarship falling from the sky. If I wanted to move forward, I would have to become everything I lacked. So I changed how I thought. I stopped waiting to feel confident. I focused on being consistent. I watched the same lesson again and again until the words slowed down. I wrote notes I barely understood at first. I copied code without knowing why it worked, then studied until it did. Loneliness became part of the routine. There was no one to share progress with, no one to celebrate small wins. Just me, a screen, and time. And in that silence, discipline grew. Not loud, not heroic, just steady. I learned something important in those months. Motivation comes and goes, but structure stays. When belief feels weak, habits carry you forward. Even on days when I felt stupid, slow, or behind, I showed up. Learning in the shadows teaches you humility. It strips away ego and replaces it with patience. You don't learn to impress anyone. You learn because stopping feels worse than continuing. I wasn't becoming skilled yet. I was becoming durable. And that mattered more than I knew, because the next stage wouldn't test what I knew. It would test how much I could endure without being seen. There is a point in every long journey where strength stops feeling strong. Not because you are weak, but because you are alone for too long. One night, everything inside me felt empty. I hadn't slept properly in days. The code on my screen refused to make sense. My body was tired, my stomach was hollow, and my mind kept repeating the same question. Why am I doing this? Standing under the harsh white lights outside the office building, holding the same stick, wearing the same uniform, I felt smaller than I ever had before. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt defeated. I remember sitting on the curb, notebook on my knees, trying to read lines of code that looked like a foreign language. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from doubt. For the first time, the thought came clearly and honestly. Maybe this really is impossible for someone like me. Tears came quietly. Not the kind that asks for help. The kind that falls when you're too tired to stop them. A few meters away, the glass doors opened. A man stepped out earlier than usual. He looked like he belonged inside. Clean clothes, confident posture, easy movement. One of the engineers. He noticed me sitting there with my notebook and stopped, not out of curiosity, out of recognition. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked up and didn't plan my answer. I just told the truth. "I'm trying to learn code." He paused, just for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "That's brave. Really brave." That was all. He didn't give advice. He didn't offer help. He didn't promise anything. He walked away and disappeared into the night. But something stayed behind. That sentence didn't solve my problems. It didn't make learning easier. But it changed the story I was telling myself. Until that moment, I believed my struggle meant I was failing. That one sentence reframed it. It meant I was early. Here's the thing about validation. It doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. When it arrives at the right moment, it can restart a heart that was about to shut down. A child once stood outside a locked classroom, holding a book too heavy for their arms. They didn't knock. They didn't leave. They sat on the floor and waited, reading by the light from the hallway. No one noticed, but the child stayed. After that night, my energy returned, not softer, but sharper. I stopped waiting for encouragement. I stopped explaining myself. I didn't need applause anymore. I had proof that what I was doing wasn't foolish. I studied harder. I woke up during the day to read more. I watched lessons again and again until the words slowed down. I didn't become confident overnight, but I became committed. And commitment is stronger than confidence when things get hard. I understood something essential then. The most dangerous lie isn't that your dream is impossible. It's that you're alone in believing it. I was still alone in practice, but not in truth. From that night forward, I stopped asking whether I deserved the dream. I focused on whether I was willing to work for it without guarantees. Because sometimes, all it takes to keep going is one quiet moment that reminds you, you are not crazy. You're just early. Belief can carry you far, but sooner or later, reality asks for proof. After months of studying in fragments, between shifts, during breaks, in borrowed hours, I reached a point where learning wasn't enough anymore. Information had filled my head, but my hands hadn't built anything real. So I decided to test myself in the simplest way possible. I would build something, not a product, not an app, just a basic website. Simple structure, clean layout, Nothing impressive. But it would be mine. I spent 2 full weeks working on it, line by line. After night shifts, after sleepless mornings, I sat with my laptop and wrote code that I barely understood at first. There were moments I forgot to eat, moments I forgot what day it was. Hunger sharpened my focus. Exhaustion blurred my judgment. Still, I kept going. Because this wasn't about talent anymore. It was about whether effort could turn into evidence. When I finally finished, my hands were shaking. I clicked, "Run." The screen went blank. Error. I stared at it, waiting for something to change. I tried again. Nothing. 2 weeks of work collapsed into silence. One small mistake. One missing line. And just like that, everything disappeared. That night, I didn't go home. I sat on the concrete stairs outside the building I guarded, my back against the wall, my head lowered. For the first time, the doubt didn't whisper. It spoke clearly. Maybe they're right. Maybe some people stay guards forever. I didn't feel angry. I felt empty, like I had reached a wall that refused to move no matter how hard I pushed. A few days later, my father handed me an envelope. Inside was a pamphlet from a local factory. Full-time work, stable hours, guaranteed pay. He wasn't trying to stop me. He was trying to protect the family. I understood that, and that understanding made the decision harder. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't promise anything. I went back to my room, opened the laptop, and started again. Slower this time, carefully. I reread every line. I tested small sections instead of rushing to the end. That's when I learned something failure doesn't explain politely. Speed hides mistakes. Patience reveals them. The second time, the website worked. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't advanced. But it loaded. The buttons responded. The structure held. And in that small success, something inside me stood up straighter. This wasn't victory. It was permission. Permission to believe that learning wasn't just theoretical. That effort could survive mistakes. That failure wasn't a sign to stop. It was a signal to adjust. From that moment, my mindset shifted. I stopped fearing walls. Walls don't move when you hit them once. They move when you understand how they're built. I realized I had two options: fail and quit, or fail and learn how not to fail the same way again. The first option would end the pain quickly. The second would extend it, but turn it into progress. That night, I chose the longer road. Because walls that don't move aren't there to trap you. They're there to teach you where to push. Time has a quiet way of changing what once felt permanent. The uniform I wore for so long no longer hangs on my body, but it still exists in my memory. Folded, clean, untouched. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of distance traveled. Today, I sit at a desk, not guarding a future, but building one. I write code that moves across borders. I work with people whose names once felt unreachable. And yet, when I look at myself, I don't see a miracle. I see endurance. Success didn't arrive loudly. There was no announcement, no celebration. Just a message in my bank account. Small, modest, almost disappointing to anyone else. But to me, it was heavy with meaning. That number wasn't money. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the nights mattered, that the silence had weight, that effort, even when unseen, accumulates. When I went home, nothing looked different. The same walls, the same kitchen, the same small inconveniences. But my father looked at me longer than usual and said, "You look different." He didn't ask how much I earned. He didn't need details. Something in my posture had answered him already. I didn't spend that first real salary on myself. I fixed what time had worn down. A better fan, a proper bed, a phone so my mother could call me without worry, groceries without hesitation. When my mother smiled without counting, I understood wealth differently. Years later, I bought my first car. Nothing impressive. But when I held the keys, my hands shook. Not from pride, from memory. I remembered standing by the road as a boy, watching other people's lives pass by, wondering if life ever chose people like me. That day it did. One evening, I passed the building where I once worked nights. A new guard stood at the gate, shoulders slouched, eyes tired, staring into the light behind the glass. He didn't notice me. I didn't stop. But for a moment, I hoped his silence carried a dream, the same way mine once did. Sometimes I still return there, not physically, but mentally, to remember where patience begins, to remember that progress often starts in places no one photographs. Today, I mentor interns who remind me of my past, not because they lack skill, but because they carry doubt quietly. I don't tell them my story to impress. I tell it so they know this: confusion is not failure. Slowness is not weakness. And background is not destiny. The world has a habit of convincing people that dreams need permission, that timing must be perfect, that support must come first. But the truth is simpler and harder. Most dreams are lonely before they are respected. What changed my life wasn't luck. It wasn't talent. It was the refusal to stop showing up when stopping made sense. I didn't become successful to prove anyone wrong. I became consistent enough to prove myself right. And if you're listening to this while standing outside your own glass wall, tired, unnoticed, unsure, remember this: struggle shapes you quietly. Results speak later. And sometimes, the only difference between the guard and the guide is the decision to stay long enough for the story to turn. If you've listened this far, you already understand something important. This was never just a story about work, money, or titles. It was about staying present when the future gives you no guarantees, about continuing when progress feels invisible and support feels absent. Most people don't quit because they fail. They quit because the silence becomes too heavy, because no one notices the effort, because the results take longer than expected. But every meaningful life is built in that quiet space first. What changed everything in this story wasn't talent or timing. It was persistence without applause. The willingness to keep learning, to keep trying, and to keep standing, even when the world offered no confirmation. So if you're in that phase right now, don't rush to escape it. Pay attention to it. This is where resilience is formed, and where direction becomes clear. Your story may not look impressive yet, but neither did this one at the beginning. And that beginning mattered more than anyone knew.